God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea.
When life becomes only what is necessary. In the village there were no extras, no soft distractions, no space for unnecessary things. Each day was built around only a few needs: water, food, movement, rest, and even those were not guaranteed. Eliana learned quickly that life here was not about comfort. It was about continuing, waking before the light, walking before speaking, working before thinking about herself. There was no time to imagine anything different, because everything required her attention just to get through the day. And slowly her world became smaller. Not physically, but mentally. She stopped thinking about what she wanted, and focused only on what had to be done. Martha, control without noise. In this place, Martha no longer needed to hide behind appearances. There were no outside voices to challenge her, no one to compare behavior, no one to question patterns. So her control became cleaner, not louder, not chaotic, just precise. Do it again. Faster this time. You already know what I expect. There were no long explanations, no arguments, only correction. And correction delivered in a way that made it feel like improvement. But over time it wasn't improvement. It was narrowing. Eliana's movements became more exact, but her confidence became smaller. Her actions became quicker, but her voice became quieter, because everything she did was being adjusted, not to help her grow, but to keep her within limits. Survival as a way of living. At first, survival had felt temporary, something to get through, something that might change. But as weeks turned into months, it stopped feeling temporary. It became normal. Eliana no longer woke up wondering how the day would go. She already knew. Wake early, move quickly, speak carefully, finish what is required. There was no space in her routine for hesitation anymore. Not the kind she had at school, because here hesitation had consequences. So her body adapted. Her hands moved faster. Her steps became more efficient. Her energy was used only where needed. She stopped wasting movement, stopped wasting words, stopped wasting thought on things that wouldn't change the outcome. And slowly survival stopped feeling like effort. It became instinct, control that lives inside. Martha didn't need to say as much anymore. In the beginning, her instructions had been constant, clear, direct, but over time, she reduced them. Not because she was less controlling, but because she no longer needed to control everything out loud. Eliana had begun doing it for her. Before speaking, Eliana corrected herself. Before acting, she adjusted her movement. Before finishing a task, she checked it twice. Not because she wanted to, but because she had learned what would be expected. And that's where control becomes strongest. When it moves from the outside to the inside. Martha would watch sometimes, say nothing, and that silence would be enough. Because Eliana would fill it with her own correction, her own doubt, her own pressure. The father present, but not there. Her father was still in the house. He still returned at night, still spoke occasionally, still existed in the same space. But something about him had faded. He no longer asked questions, not real ones. How was your day? Everything okay? The words came out of habit, not attention. And Eliana had learned how to answer them. Yes. Always simple. Always safe. Because she could tell he wasn't really listening for the truth. He was listening for reassurance. Something that would allow him to continue not looking deeper. Sometimes he would glance at her, pause for just a second longer than usual, as if something almost reached the surface. But then he would turn away, back to his routine. back to what he could manage. Because facing what he avoided would require something from him, and he wasn't ready to give it. The quiet transformation. By now, Eliana was no longer the same child who had arrived in the village. Not just because of what she had experienced, but because of how she had adapted. She no longer expected help. At first, she had waited for someone to notice, to step in, to make something easier. But that waiting faded. Not because help came, but because it didn't. So she stopped expecting it. And once expectation disappears, disappointment changes. It becomes quieter. She began solving everything alone. Small problems, daily tasks, unexpected challenges. Eliana began handling them without asking. Not confidently, not perfectly, but independently. Because there was no alternative. And that built something inside her. A quiet self-reliance. Not the kind that feels strong, but the kind that forms when there is no other choice. Her emotions became contained. She still felt things. Frustration, confusion, hurt. But she stopped showing them outwardly. Not completely, but enough. Because expression didn't change outcomes. So she learned to carry those feelings internally, to let them pass through her quietly. The question remained. Through everything, the question stayed. Is this how it has to be? It didn't grow louder, but it didn't disappear either. It stayed beneath everything. Waiting, Eliana. The same day, under a different sky. Morning, nothing is said. The morning begins the same. Light through the cracks. Dust in the air. Movement without conversation. Eliana finishes her tasks. Water collected. Floor swept. Everything in its place. She waits. Not for instructions. For something else. For the moment when food usually appears. But it doesn't come. Martha moves past her. Says nothing. Eliana doesn't ask. Because she already knows. If something is not given, it is not meant to be requested. Midday. The feeling grows. By midday, the feeling is clearer. A hollow space. Not sharp. Not painful. Just present. Eliana continues working. Her movements are slower now. Not noticeably, but enough for her to feel it. She drinks water. It helps, but only for a moment. Outside, watching others eat. She steps outside briefly. A family nearby sits together. Food laid out simply, shared easily. Laughter. Conversation. Nothing excessive. Nothing luxurious, but enough. Eliana watches from a distance. Not longing, not envy, just noticing the difference. Evening, the quiet realization. As the sun lowers, the truth settles fully. Today there will be no food. Not later. Not eventually. Just not. Eliana sits for a moment. Not collapsing. Not reacting. Just sitting. A thought comes. I can continue. Not hopeful, not dramatic. Just steady. Night, learning to sleep without it. That night the house is silent. Eliana lies down. Her body is aware. But her mind is calm. Because she has already accepted it. She closes her eyes. And slowly sleep comes. Not comfortable, but enough. Eliana. She did not eat that day. And yet she endured it. Quietly. Completely. Serafini. The same day. Under a different sky. Morning. Effortless beginning. Seraphine wakes to light. Not through cracks but through open windows. Soft curtains moving. Fresh air. A voice calls gently. Breakfast is ready. She stretches. Smiles slightly. No urgency. No pressure. Morning meal. More than enough. The table is set. Fruit, warm bread, fresh drink, nothing excessive but abundant. Her mother sits with her. Eat before it gets cold, she says warmly. Seraphine does, without thinking twice, because she never has to. Midday lightness. By midday, Seraphine moves freely, learning, talking, laughing. Her energy is steady, because it has been sustained, without effort, without thought. Afternoon, choice, not survival. She chooses what to do next. Walk, read, talk, rest. Each action is a choice, not a necessity. And that changes everything. Evening, full and safe dinner comes easily, prepared, shared, no silence, only conversation, only presence. Night. Rest without weight. That night, Seraphine sleeps deeply, not because she is exhausted, but because she is at peace. Her body is at rest, because it has been cared for. She did not think about food that day, because she never had to. A moment of stillness. One afternoon, something unusual happened. Eliana finished her task earlier than expected. There was nothing immediate to do. No instructions. No movement required. Just time. She sat outside. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't reacting to anything. She just watched. The sky shifting slowly. The wind moving through the grass. Distant voices carrying across the village. And in that stillness, something surfaced. Not fear, not pressure, but awareness. A quiet recognition of herself separate from everything around her. Not defined by it. Just present. The gathering, when control begins to fracture. The night that felt different. The village had gone quiet. Not the usual quiet of rest, but something heavier. Even the wind seemed to move more slowly, as if it carried weight. Inside the small house, everything appeared unchanged. Her father sat in his usual place, tired, distant, focused on nothing in particular. Eliana moved quietly, finishing the last of her tasks. And Martha watched. Not openly, not obviously, but with a stillness that felt sharper. Because something had been building. Something she could feel but not fully control. Eliana was no longer reacting the same way. She still obeyed. Still completed every task. Still moved with care. But there were moments now small, almost invisible, where she paused differently. Not from fear, from thought. And that difference mattered. The departure. Martha rose without a word. Her movement was smooth, practiced. She stepped into the narrow hallway, where shadows stretched thin along the walls. Once they had responded instantly to her presence. Now they flickered. Subtle, but undeniable. She stopped for just a moment. Not in hesitation, but in recognition. Then she continued. Because whatever was happening, she intended to regain control. The threshold. At the end of the hallway, the air shifted. It always did. But tonight, it resisted. Like a surface that did not want to open. Martha extended her hand slightly. The space bent slowly, reluctantly, and then it gave way. She stepped through. But the transition was not clean. For the first time, it felt unstable. The chamber, not as it was. The chamber formed around her. But something was wrong. The candles were uneven. Some burned low, struggling. Others flared too brightly, their light sharp and restless. The circle of 11 figures stood in place, but not in harmony. Where they once turned together, they now shifted individually. Some faced her. Some did not. And the silence was different. Not welcoming, measuring, the opening words. Martha did not wait. She is contained, she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. Her actions are limited. Her response is predictable. The structure is holding. The words were precise, almost rehearsed. But the chamber did not respond the way it once had. No laughter, no approval, only stillness. The first challenge. From the far side of the circle, a woman's voice emerged. Calm, measured. You are not containing the girl. A pause. Or compressing her. She still has so much life in her. The word lingered. Compressed. Martha's gaze sharpened. There is a lot more difference in her now that we moved here. I can crash her better. Without limitations, she replied. But the answer came too quickly, and the room noticed. The pattern they see. Another voice followed. She observes. The chamber stilled further. Martha said nothing. She does not only react anymore, the voice continued. She waits. She watches. She adjusts, and her father is not fully controlled. Each word landed with quiet precision. That is not containment. A pause. That is adaptation. Martha pushes forward. Martha turns slowly, addressing the circle as a whole. Then pressure will increase, she said. Her tone sharpened slightly. Consistency will complete the process. She will not have the space to adapt. I remove her father completely. That might be the reason for her resistance. For a moment, it seemed like the room might accept this. But then a shift. Subtle. Several figures moved. Not toward her, but away. The line she tries to cross. There were variables interfering, so we had to move. I can now destroy her and complete our plans, Martha continued. Her voice quieter now, more deliberate. They all can be removed. The words were simple, but the meaning beneath them was not, and the reaction was immediate. Silence fell thicker than before. Then a figure's voice spoke. No, you have failed us. The refusal. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It stopped everything. The woman figure who spoke stepped slightly forward into the light. Still mostly hidden. We do not move in that direction. We take control, the voice said. Martha's expression tightened. It is necessary, she replied. It is exposure, the voice corrected. A pause. An exposure leads to collapse. If you fail again, it'll be your life for hers. Failure is not an option. The fracture in the circle. For the first time, the circle was no longer unified. Some figures remained still. Others shifted again. Not in agreement, not in support, but in distance. The structure that once felt absolute now felt uncertain. And Martha felt it. Not externally, but in the absence of alignment. What they truly fear. Another voice spoke. Quieter, but clearer than all the others. You misunderstand the risk. Martha turned toward it. The risk is not that she fails, the voice continued. A pause. The risk is what forms when failure repeats and awareness grows. The girl has a strong spirit, so failure is not acceptable. It's too risky. Silence. Because that was the truth. The realization. Martha did not respond immediately. Because she understood. If Eliana remained unaware, this would have been simple. But she wasn't. Not anymore. She was watching. Learning. Adapting and resisting. And that meant the situation was no longer predictable. The end without resolution. The gathering did not close. There was no agreement. No direction. Only distance. And watchfulness. Martha stepped back. The shadows opened, but not smoothly. And when she disappeared, the circle did not follow. It remained. Observing. Returned to the village. The house was still. Nothing had changed. Her father sat in silence. Eliana lay awake. Not moving, but not asleep. The subtle shift in Eliana. Something had changed in her. Not something visible, but something real. She no longer moved only out of reaction. There were moments now brief, quiet, where she chose her stillness, chose when to act, chose when to wait. And that choice, no matter how small, was new. The path to the store, a different walk. The road was still long, the ground still uneven, the air still heavy. But Eliana's steps were no longer automatic. She watched her own movement, felt the rhythm of her walking. Not rushing, not dragging, just steady. Other children passed her, talking, laughing, living in ways that felt distant. But this time Eliana didn't shrink from it. She observed it. An observation created distance but also clarity. The subtle correction. You're slower today, slow kills. You should move with purpose, Martha said later. Her tone was calm, measured. Eliana paused. Not long, just long enough to choose her response. I'm doing it properly as you instructed, she said quietly. Not defensive, not uncertain, just factual. The words hung in the air. Martha did not respond immediately, because this was new. Not disobedience, but not submission either. Something in between, the reflection at the well. The next evening, Eliana stood at the well. The sky dimmed slowly above her. She lowered the bucket, listened to the sound of water, then paused. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She looked at the surface, still, reflective. And for the first time she didn't just see the task. She saw herself. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to recognize something. She was still there, beneath everything. At the well, the first choice. That night, Eliana returned to the well. The sky was dim, the air cooler. She lowered the bucket slowly, listened to the sound, and then she stopped. Not because she had to, because she chose to. She sat beside the well, just for a moment. The world didn't end. Nothing broke. No voice called her back immediately. And in that small space something opened. Not freedom, but possibility. One of the village women sat observing Eliana. She had watched her since the day they moved to the village. She knew how special Eliana was. The first thought that feels like hers. As she sat there, a thought came clearer than before. I am not only what happens to me. I am what God says I am, she said. It didn't come with certainty. It didn't feel powerful. But it felt real. And that made it different from every other thought she had carried. Martha's growing unease. Back at the house, Martha stood still. She didn't know why, but something felt out of place. Like a pattern slightly misaligned. Everything was still functioning as planned. Still controlled, but not as tightly. And that difference, no matter how small, was enough to create concern. Eliana was starting to seem slightly empowered. The Sisterhood of the Night had warned her. Failure will not be tolerated, they said. Martha knew she needed to act fast.